All right, guys, let's talk about the Bluetooth control. So far, we've done audio and information, and those were actually relatively simple because they were resistance ladders. Well, the Bluetooth control is a little bit more complicated than that on the S550. And then there's two versions of it on the S550, which actually makes it a bit more complicated. So let's start at the beginning and make sure you understand how the Bluetooth works on the S197. On the S197, there's three buttons. There's your phone button, which is your, it's got the little phone symbol. There's the OK button, and then there is the talk sync button. Very simple resistance ladder. You can see voice, the voice activated sync is 51.1 ohms. Then when you get to the OK button, it's multiple resistors, but they all add up to 334 ohms. And then add in one more resistor, and you get the phone button at 508 ohms total. Finally, when you're not pressing any buttons, there's a resting resistance of 1100 ohms. Okay, very straightforward. If I scroll down here, we can see here in the purple here is where it comes, the feed comes out of this pin. It goes across, it comes over here, it listens to see if you press these buttons, and then depending on what button you press, it will close the circuit on any one of these given resistors and go back to the original source. So that's how S197 works. Again, very straightforward. On the S550, things are a little bit more complicated. Okay, first, there's one extra button in here. On the S197, there's only one voice button, but on the S550, there are two. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to tell you guys, I am going to wire these up, and as we go through, we're going to set these up so those two buttons act virtually the same. They will have the same functionality as the one button has in the S197. So if we come down here and we look at the diagram, okay, this is the diagram that Ford provides, and there are a lot of things wrong with it. First and foremost, the connector, and I'll show you it to you right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's a 12-pin connector, okay? When we look over here at the diagram, it looks like they're using pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the ground, the feed for the LEDs is listed as pin 6. I cut the screenshot off, you can't see it, but the system doesn't, the actual connector doesn't use those pins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It actually uses separate ones. So that's the first thing that's incorrect about the diagram. Number 2 in the diagram is that it would appear, if you look at this straightforward, that there are 2, 4, 7, and then 4 more. That's 11 resistors on the board. That's not the case either. There's actually somewhere in the ballpark of, I think, 24, 25 resistors. So what I've done here is I've identified, number 1, what resistors actually feed into these particular circuits. So, if we were to look at the phone minus circuit, it is resistors 8, 10, and 12 that comprise of that mini circuit. So that's the second thing that the diagram has wrong. The third thing that the diagram has wrong is that the labeling is wildly incorrect. If you were to look at this diagram without knowing anything else, you would assume that phone plus and phone minus are actually related to your phone up and phone down, right? Those two symbols, those two buttons, right? Phone plus, phone minus, probably phone plus, phone minus. The thing is, that's also wrong. Phone plus and phone minus actually ties into these keys. So you'll see here, phone plus is actually the M key. That's here. Phone minus is actually the voice key. Voice is phone down, and mute is phone up. So this diagram is wildly incorrect. And you'll see there's a massive amount of research I did here to actually figure that out, figure out what the resistances are, determine what are the testing pads you can use to test those resistances. Is the resistor there? Does it have a label? And so on. Long story short, Here are the final values. So in the diagram, it shows voice and mute. The actual button is the phone hang up and phone pickup button. This is the measured resistance. Here are the resistors that are in line for those particular circuits. Here is the calculated resistance if we just take the face value of those resistors. So this calculated total resistance should be relatively close to my measured resistance. And you can see that it is for all of these. Now, I'm not going to go too much in depth into these corresponding documents. You can go through, you can take a look at that. You can actually see, follow each and every one of these. Here, if I go back, I can give you a solid example. If you look, Phone Plus says that the feed comes from the 5-pin and exits through the 4-pin. If I come down here and I look at Phone Plus, this is the diagram for Phone Plus. Phone Plus actually feeds in through the 7-pin, goes through all my resistors, goes through my diode, and comes down here and actually exits through the 2-pin. So that's why I want to make it clear that that diagram is a good starting point, but it's wildly incorrect. So there's a couple things we have to work on. One, we're going to have to mimic the output. We're going to have to mimic the resistances, as you know, and we want to set up the phone plus, phone minus, which actually not phone plus, phone minus, phone down and phone up, which are over here, to mimic the one phone button that's in the S197. The last thing we have to consider here, and this is where things get a little bit crazy, is that notice on the S197 Bluetooth, it is a completely single resistance ladder that's in series. Every one of these resistors is in series. When we look at the Bluetooth control, though, the Bluetooth control is actually 3 in parallel. You have resistors that don't sit fully in the ladder, and they are not activated. They're in parallel with one another. So if you don't touch any of this, you would actually have a resting resistance of these resistors all together, but not just summed up in series, but in parallel with one another. Okay? That becomes very difficult to measure because of these diodes. Most multimeters don't have a voltage high enough to open these diodes. So you can't just test your outbound pin with, any one or the total of your inbound pins. So this is something to consider that is going to be difficult for us when we set this up. So what do we do? How do we get over to this setup? Well, what I did was I thought to myself, when you think of a resistance ladder, right? The resistance ladder is going to have the highest resistance when it's resting, and it's going to have progressively lower resistances when you press a button. Okay? So if we think back, if I press the talk button, 51 ohms. If I press let's say the OK button, I want to say it was 330 ohms, if I recall correctly. And if I press the phone button, it's 508 ohms. The resting resistance is 1100 or 1500 ohms, and the resting resistance means we're not going to have any action on the circuit, right? Nothing. The car's not going to do anything unless the resistance drops to at least 508, in which point it will trigger the phone button. So my resistance resting could be 2100. It could be 20,000, 200,000. It could even be potentially infinity. What if we leave the resistor off entirely and let the circuit just sit idle, broken, if you will, and it only connects when you press a button? Well, I'm going to preface you guys with this. There is a reason that resistance ladders have a closed resting resistance. Okay? The resting resistance is meant to prevent there from being stray voltages that are just kind of floating around, if I recall reading correctly in some of my research, there is a reason for Ford did not just say, hey, we have all these extra resistors laying around, we're going to add them to the circuit. So I'm gonna warn all you guys that when we start this is not the fully proper way to do it. If you recall, if you go through the documentation, you'll see in the information section, you'll see in the audio section, I put optional for that last resistor. It works without it. It's worked for me so far without it. Not only did it work on the new switches, but what I did and what you see here in this screen is this 6040 resistor is the final resting resistor for the original S197 switch. I removed this 6040. This is the 6040 resistor for the audio. I removed it. I plugged the S197 switch back into the steering wheel, and my audio controls worked fine. I removed the 6040 over here, which is the one for the Bluetooth, and my Bluetooth controls work fine. So I'm just going to tell you guys one last time. I'm warning you that if you go this route, it should work, but it's not the proper way of doing it. I may do a final follow-up video on redoing these Bluetooth controls with the correct resistance ladder. Quite frankly, I just haven't gotten around to it. So now that you understand and know that, let's talk about actually changing the diagram. So here is the non-navigation version of the resistance ladder and how we're going to set this up. So you'll notice, number one, in purple here are all the correct pins on the connector. So it's 2 and 8, pin 2 and pin 8 for the LEDs, and it's pin 4, 5, 6, and 7 for the controls. Now, remember, our S197 is just a simple resistance ladder. So first things first, we're going to group all of these together. Now, I decided to do it outside of the connector. You could do it inside across the pins, bridge the pins, but it's not something I wanted to do. So outside the connector, I'm going to connect them all together in the harness. The second thing I did was I removed each one of these resistors in order to break that final, in order to sort of break those resting resistances. You'll notice I labeled in here what the actual button is in these parentheses. So you can see here, this is the actual circuit for the M key. This is the circuit for the voice key. And then over here is the circuit for the phone up and phone down. So what do we do? Okay, the instructions, if you want to do it the easiest way possible, are very straightforward here. Remove R1, remove R5, remove R12, remove R19. And I color-coded this to correspond to which one of these you're actually modifying. You're going to remove R3 and replace it with 0 ohms. Okay, that's over here. You're going to replace this one with a 0. Then you're going to remove, where you removed R1 entirely, you're going to add a 508 ohm resistor. And that's going to, and actually this is incorrect, so I am going to wipe this out. See, we're going to modify this on the fly as we do this. So we are not removing that entirely. And replace with 508 ohms. So the reason you're going to do a 508 and a 0 is because we want the OK button, or not OK, the phone up button to act the same as phone down. So if you put the 508 in R1, when you press OK, it triggers and completes the circuit at 508 ohms. If you put a 0 resistor here, then when you press the phone down, you get 508 plus 0, which is also 508. So you get the same resistance triggered with both buttons. Okay? You're going to remove and replace R8 with 51 ohms. That's going to allow your voice button to trigger at 51 ohms. And then finally, you're going to remove R15 and replace it with a 330 ohm resistor, which allows the M key to act like the OK button. Okay? Now, if you want to change this into a true resistance ladder, here are the instructions to do that. Once you have done the act of the resistor changes above. Okay? I haven't done this yet, which is why it's in black. I may eventually go back and implement this solve, but I haven't done it. So if we look here, and I'll zoom out a little bit for you guys so we can see, here is our circuit. Here is how we change it. We're going to entirely remove R5, R12, and R19. That breaks the continuity, the resting voltages of these circuits. We're going to replace R1 with 508 and R3 with 0. That will complete our phone up, phone down. And then we're going to replace R15 with 330, and that's going to do our phone plus. We're going to replace R8 with 51. I'm sorry, our M key, which is actually going to operate as our OK button, remember. And then the last one here, which is R8 getting replaced with 51 ohms, that is going to be our talk to sync button. So that's how you update the Bluetooth with navigation. You'll see here, this is the actual one. So you can see I've replaced my 330 ohms here. Here's my 511. Here's my 0 over R3. Here's my 510 not 510, 51 ohms for R8. And then I removed R5, I removed R12, and I removed R19. Now, once again, I don't believe you have to do these trace lines around the diodes. Again, I only did it because I wanted to test the resistance at the actual lines as I was doing it. So you may not be able to do that because I do think the car's voltage itself, the feed voltage, is enough to open those diodes and correctly send the signal. Now, last but not least, we have to remember there is a premium version or a higher level version of the switches for the Bluetooth, for the little Bluetooth switch. Here's the thing with this. I opted to not go with this because there's a couple things. Number one, phone up, phone down are in the same spot. My nav and my gears are different, and I have this pony button and this music button. None of these really sync up with OK and the talk to sync button. So if you guys want to go down this route, I've done the testing. I've made it work. I will leave it entirely up to you if it's what you want to do. But there are some things you have to watch out for. First, before, when I showed you this, you had the phone up and phone down that were linked together in one circuit. And then you had this one on a separate circuit and this one on a separate circuit. Now, this actual circuit board is linked with these two on one circuit, these two on one circuit, and these two on one circuit. I took the original diagram here and I threw it completely in the garbage. None of it made sense. It was impossible to follow. So you'll notice you don't even see the original Ford information here. I just overwrote it completely with the buttons and what they're actually labeled as. So what did I decide to do? Because the S197 literally only has 3 functions and you have 6 buttons, I opted to completely disable the nav and settings. So those buttons, you can physically push them, but they'll do nothing. The phone up and phone down operate exactly the same way as before, although I will call out, they're located in a different place on the circuit board. So just be careful of that. And then finally, the pony and music, I opted to make the pony one the sync voice button and the music button the OK button. Again, as part of doing this. So once again, you just follow the instructions here. Now I have not done the mapping yet to change this to be a complete resistance ladder, nor have I tested it. It'll eventually come, but it didn't come at the time of me recording this video. If I scroll down here, the one major change that you want to consider is, now remember, if you remember correctly, this part of the diagram down here is what controlled, if we scroll back up to the without navigation, Phone up and phone down was controlled by blue, which was all these R1 through R6 resistors. Over here, R1 through R6 controls nav and settings. So don't think you could just do the same thing as the without nav as the with nav. You want to follow this separate set of instructions. Okay? That's going to require you to change out R8 with a 508 resistor, R10 with a 0 ohm resistor, and remove R12 entirely. You're going to just simply remove R1. That's going to break the feed to the nav and settings button and disable them entirely. And finally, if you want the music button to act as your talk sync button and your OK button to act as your pony button to act as OK, we have to reverse the order of the buttons while also changing the resistors. It's actually really easy. Okay, although it looks like we have to do this bridge, all you have to do is you remove R19 to break the resting voltage. You're going to swap R17 out with a 283 ohm resistor. You're going to remove R15, and then when you reinstall R15 with a 51.1 ohm resistor, instead of going horizontal, you're going to go vertical. This is going to allow the system to rearrange the buttons, because this is the via for the music button. Sorry, this is the via for the music button, which will act as the talk sync. And then if that's not activated, the resistance is going to go this way into this via when you press the other button, which will the music button, which will activate the OK button. Then you'll get 330 ohms. So I'll come down here. I'll stop right here so you can see all of the changes that were made. You'll see I removed R1. You'll see I swapped out R8 with 510 ohms. I have put in a 0 for R10. And I've removed R12. I've removed R19. I've swapped out R17 with 271 ohms. And then I took out R15 and I installed a 51 ohm resistor vertically. This gives you the same result. Your nav and settings will be disabled down here. This will allow your phone up, phone down to operate. And over here, this will allow your music button and your pony button to operate in place of the talk to sync and the OK button. Okay? So that's it. Seems like a lot, but actually this is a lot easier to physically do than the information control and the audio control, because you don't have those large resistors that you need to jump all around all over the board with. The board is actually decently set up where we could modify it with simply just the 0603 resistors and just put them in the places where we need to put them. All right. Well, I hope that was informative for you guys, and I wish you the best of luck, and I will catch you in the next one. See ya.